The house I had lived in for the past 40 years had never felt big before. Even as the children grew up and moved away, Elizabeth and I filled it with our presence, the breakfast conversations, the quiet evenings in the library, the sounds of the old record player on Sundays. But after her death 3 years ago, everything changed. Now I can hear the floorboards creaking under my feet, the ticking of the floor clock in the hallway, the wind howling in the chimney at night. The house became humming, empty, and too spacious for a lonely old man. My name is Garland Winship. I am 76 and a widower. I was once a respected financial analyst, a man whose opinion was listened to. Now, I'm just an old man who lives in the past and checks. Tuesday morning. I wake up at 6:30 as I have every day for the last 50 years. Habit is the only thing that has remained the same. I make my bed, take a shower, shave. The wrinkles on my face that Elizabeth used to call wisdom lines now seem like mere furrows of time. There's a tiredness in her eyes that even cold water can't wash away. Breakfast, toast, scrambled eggs, coffee. The newspaper, which I still subscribe to out of old habit, though I could read the news on my tablet. But there's something soothing about the rustle of the paper, the smell of printing ink. Little rituals you cling to when everything else slips away. The phone rings when I'm doing the dishes. Meryl's number, my only daughter. Wiping my hands, I hesitate a second before answering. For some reason, every time she calls, I feel a mixture of hope and anxiety. "Daddy, are you home?" Her voice sounds rushed like always. "Where else would I be, Meryl?" "Don't start, please." "Listen, Bryce and I got a notice from the bank, something about the mortgage interest rate. Would you mind taking a look at it?" That's the whole conversation. No, "How are you?" No, "What's new?" Straight to the point. I've long since given up expecting our conversations to start any other way. "Sure," I said. "Bring the documents. I'll take a look. I don't have time to stop by. I'll email the photos to your email. Look at it today, okay? It's urgent." And the beeps. Even "thank you" and "goodbye" have become a luxury in our conversations. I sigh, finish my cooled coffee, and walk to my office, where the old computer hums like a jet engine. Elizabeth has often said it's time for me to replace it, but I've gotten used to it. Another little constant in a changing world. The letter from Meryl is already in the mail. A scan of the notice from the bank and a short message. What does this mean? Could we lose the house? Typical of her to be immediately dramatic. I put on my glasses and scrutinize the document. No big deal. Just a normal interest rate reset notice, but they'll need to make an extra payment to avoid an increase in monthly payments. I open my bank account. There's enough money in the account, pension, investments I made in my lucky years. Money has never been a problem. I knew how to earn it and spend it wisely. I transfer the required amount to Meryl's account and send her a short message. Everything's fine. Money transferred. Standard notification. Nothing to worry about. I get a reply an hour later. Okay. 2 characters. All the gratitude I can hope for. I close the computer and walk out onto the terrace with a cup of fresh tea. The garden that Elizabeth used to tend is now maintained by a gardener who comes once a week. I pay him more than necessary because he's the only one who sometimes lingers for a cup of coffee and a conversation about the weather or baseball. This isn't the first time I've helped Meryl and Bryce with their mortgage. When they bought a house 5 years ago, too big, too expensive for their income, I offered to help with the down payment. Meryl said at the time that they could handle it themselves. Pride. But 3 months later she called in tears. They couldn't keep up with the payments. Since then I've been backing them up regularly, especially when unexpected expenses come up. Bryce is a mid-level manager at a pharmaceutical company. Ambitious, but not particularly talented. Always talking about the promotion he's about to get, the bonuses that are just around the corner. Meryl works part-time at a contemporary art gallery. She studied art history in college, dreaming of becoming a curator. But then she met Bryce, and her ambition somehow dissolved into his. They have 2 children, my grandchildren. Caden, 14, always on his cell phone, and Ella, 10, the only one who still sometimes genuinely enjoys my visits. Lately, though, she too has become distant, adopting her parents' mannerisms. I see them once a month, sometimes less. Usually it's at Meryl's initiative when they need financial help or babysitting. I used to offer to have family dinners every Sunday, as was the custom in our family when Elizabeth was alive. But Meryl always found excuses. Then Bryce's work, then the kids' school projects, or just, we're really tired. In the afternoon, I decide to take a walk to the store. Henlopen Acres is a small town where everyone knows each other. I've lived here all my life and I'm still recognized on the streets, even though many of my peers have long since moved to Florida, either to be with their children or in a cemetery. At Jenkins's supermarket, I meet Louise Hampton, the widow of a dentist with whom we once played golf. She's standing at a shelf of canned soups, studying the labels. "Garland, haven't seen you in a while. How you doing?" "I'm fine, Louise. The usual. And you?" "Oh, my knees aren't so good anymore, but I'm not complaining. I'm getting ready for the grandkids this weekend. Robert and his family from Boston, and Jane and her husband and the kids. We're having a barbecue on Saturday. Would you come?" I shake my head. "Thanks for the invitation, but I don't want to impose on your family celebration." "What an imposition!" She claps me on the shoulder. "You're practically family. Elizabeth was my best friend. Come, it'll be fun. By the way, you're going to be a great-grandfather this year too, right? Jane told me Ella's having a baby." I freeze with a can of tomato soup in my hand. "Ella? My granddaughter? She's only 10. Louise looks embarrassed. "Oh, I'm sorry, I got confused. I was thinking of the Martinsons' daughter. They have Ella too, but I can see in her eyes that she's not confused. She just said something she shouldn't have." "No, Louise, you were talking about my family." "What did you mean by that?" She sighs, realizing there's no retreat. "Meryl is pregnant. She and Bryce are expecting their 3rd child. I thought you knew. I can feel the blood rushing to my face. My daughter is pregnant, and I find out from my neighbor at the supermarket." "Of course I know," I lie, trying to keep my dignity. "I just didn't realize who you were talking about right away." Louise clearly doesn't believe me, but she pretends to accept what I'm saying. "So, are you coming on Saturday?" "We'll see. Business, you know." I hurriedly finish my shopping and head back home. My hands shake slightly as I open the door. Meryl is pregnant. 3rd child. And she hasn't seen fit to let me know. Not even this morning when she called about the mortgage. Even when I wired her the money. I call her tonight. She doesn't answer. She calls back an hour later. "Dad? Is something wrong?" "No, it's nothing. I just wanted to see how you were doing." Pause. I can almost hear her wondering what I really need. "I'm fine. Thanks for your help with the mortgage." "You're welcome." I take a deep breath. "Meryl, I feel like there's something you'd like to tell me." "What is it?" "About something important in your life. Changes." Another pause. Longer. "Is it about the baby?" She finally asks. "Who told you?" "Is it important?" "We wanted to surprise you. We're having our 15th wedding anniversary party next week. We were going to announce it there." "A party?" I ask you again. I hadn't heard of it. "Yeah, it's on Saturday. Nothing special, just a gathering of close friends and family." I feel something cold clench inside me. Close family. But not me. "I see," I say, trying to keep my voice steady. "And when were you going to invite me?" "Dad, don't start, please. We thought you'd be uncomfortable. It'll be noisy, lots of people, music. You don't like that kind of thing." "Did you ask?" "What? Did you ask if I wanted to come to my only daughter's wedding anniversary party where she's going to announce her pregnancy?" "Dad." "I see," I said again. "Well, congratulations on the baby and on the anniversary." "Dad, if you want to come—" No, 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 I don't want to be a burden. Good night, Meryl. I'm hanging up without waiting for an answer. I sit down in the chair by the fireplace, the same one Elizabeth used to sit in with a book and a glass of wine. I stare at the fire and think about how strange life is. All my life I've tried to provide for my family, to give them everything I could. And this is the result. I learn about the most important events in my daughter's life from the neighbors at the supermarket. I get up, take out the bottle of whiskey I save for special occasions from the cupboard, and pour myself 2 fingers. The bitter taste spreads down my throat and I suddenly feel incredibly old and unwanted, invisible in my own family. The thought of the party rolls around in my head. A wedding anniversary, 15 years. I remember that day well. Meryl in her white dress, Bryce nervously adjusting his tie. I remember walking her down the aisle, giving her a toast, writing the down payment check for their first apartment, a wedding gift they accepted without hesitation. And now I have not been invited to the celebration of this date. Me, who continues to write checks, paying for their lives. I take another sip of whiskey and make a decision. I will show up at this party on Saturday, without an invitation, just to look my daughter and her husband in the eye, to remind them of my existence. After all, I have dignity too, and it's time to remind them of that. The morning after my conversation with Meryl greeted me with a headache, the result of an unfinished bottle of whiskey and a sleepless night. In the bathroom, looking at my reflection, I saw the face of an old man with red eyes and deep wrinkles. This was not how I had envisioned old age when I was a young, ambitious financier, confident that I was doing the right thing. I took 2 aspirin tablets and went out on the terrace with a cup of strong coffee. The morning air was fresh, but my thoughts were heavy. They were taking me back to the past, to the origins of everything that had brought Meryl and me to today. The year is 1981. I'm 32, a young up-and-coming financial analyst at Webster Securities. Elizabeth just gave birth to our daughter after 3 miscarriages. Meryl is our little miracle, a long-awaited child in whom we have invested all our hopes. I remember the day I brought them home from the hospital. Elizabeth sat in the back seat with a tiny bundle in her arms, and I drove as carefully as if I were carrying a crystal vase. I remember when we brought Meryl into the nursery, which I had painted a soft yellow color. I remember her first smile, her first steps, her first word, "Mommy." But what I remember even better are the endless evenings at the office, the early departures and late returns. The 80s were a time of opportunity for people like me, ambitious, hungry, willing to work 18 hours a day to advance their careers. "You missed her first day of school," Elizabeth told me that night when I returned from a 2-day business trip to Boston. I explained that I couldn't refuse the appointment, I replied, irritated by the rebuke. "This is an important client. My career depends on him." "And our daughter depends on you," she countered. "She's been waiting for you, painted a picture for you, wanted you to walk her to class." I remember the picture, a clumsy child's drawing of 3 figures holding hands, Mom, Dad, and me. A gift I received a day late. "I'll make it up to her," I promised. "I'll take her to the zoo this weekend. Or an amusement park, wherever she wants to go." Elizabeth just shook her head. She'd always been able to express more with that gesture than with words. That's just the way it was. I missed school plays and parent-teacher conferences, birthdays and family dinners, and then I made up for it with expensive gifts, exotic trips, the latest toys. Meryl got everything she wanted, or everything I thought she should want. "Daddy, you promised you'd come to my concert," 12-year-old Meryl said, standing in the doorway of my home office where I was working on my quarterly report. "Honey, I really don't have time. The deadline's looming." "You're always on deadline." Her voice shook with resentment. "There's always reports and meetings. It's my job, Meryl. It's why you have this room, your computer, your music lessons. Someday you'll understand." "I don't want a computer. I want you to come to my concert." I didn't go. Instead, the next day, I bought her a new synthesizer, the best model I could find. She didn't even unpack it. That summer, we traveled to Europe, London, Paris, Rome. Luxury hotels, the best restaurants, tours of all the sights. Meryl smiled at the photos, collected souvenirs, ate ice cream in St. Mark's Square, but there was already a wall growing between us, invisible but tangible. By the time she was 16, Meryl had become a sullen teenager who barely spoke to me. She spent all her time in her room or with friends I hardly knew. When we did find ourselves at the same table, it wasn't much of a conversation. "How was school going?" I asked. "Fine," she said, not taking her eyes off her plate. "What are your plans for the weekend?" "Nothing special." Elizabeth tried to establish contact between us, but to no avail. We had become like two strangers forced to live under the same roof. "She hates me," I said to my wife one day after another silent dinner. "She doesn't hate you, Garland. She just doesn't know you. You're like a distant relative who comes to visit once in a while." Her words hurt, but I knew there was some truth to them. I'd missed something important by focusing on providing material goods for my family. When Meryl announced she was going to college in California as far away from home as possible, I wasn't surprised. I paid for her tuition, her dorm, her flights. It was the least I could do. In college, she was studying art history, a subject that seemed careerless to me, but I kept my opinions to myself. I promised Elizabeth I wouldn't interfere. "At least let her make her own choices in this one," she said. During her sophomore year, Meryl met Bryce Howard. He was 4 years older, studying business administration and bartending part-time on campus. When she brought him home for Thanksgiving, I immediately disliked him. "I don't like him," I told Elizabeth that night when we were alone. "There's something wrong with him." "You're just jealous," she smiled. "She's grown up, Garland. We're going to have to accept that." "It's not that. I've been searching for the right words. He looks at her like a trophy. And our house, too." "You're being unfair. He seems like a perfectly nice young man." "Trust my experience, dear. I'm a good judge of character. This guy's an adventurer." But my intuition didn't convince my wife, much less my daughter. Meryl and Bryce continued to date. After college, she moved in with him in New York, where he took a job with a pharmaceutical company. She found a job as an assistant at a small gallery. "Daddy, we've decided to get married," she announced during one of her rare visits home. I looked at Elizabeth, seeking support, but she only shook her head. "Stay out of it," her look said. "If you're sure it will make you happy," I said, trying to sound sincere. "I'm sure," she replied, looking me straight in the eye with defiance. The wedding was lavish. Bryce had insisted on it. I'd paid for everything: the country club, the catering for 200 people, the band, the photographers. Most of the guests were friends of Bryce's that I was seeing for the first time. "Who are all these people?" I asked Elizabeth as we danced to the slow music. "Not now, Garland," she replied. "Just smile and pretend everything's okay, for Meryl's sake." And I smiled. I made a toast wishing the newlyweds happiness and prosperity, handed them a check for a down payment on a condo, a wedding gift they accepted without hesitation. "Thank you, Dad," Meryl said, kissing me on the cheek. "You're the best." In that moment, I almost believed that things would work out, that this wedding would be a new beginning, not just for Meryl, but for our relationship. But time proved me wrong. Bryce turned out to be exactly what I thought he was: ambitious, but not particularly talented. He changed jobs every 2 or 3 years, always assuring me that the next position would be a breakthrough. Meryl had abandoned her art career when Caden was born. Then Ella came along. Family expenses were rising and income wasn't keeping up. "We're thinking of buying a house," Meryl said during one of her visits. Elizabeth was ill by then. Pancreatic cancer, terminal. "A house?" I asked. Are you sure you can afford the mortgage? Bryce got a promotion, and I'm going back to work. Ella's old enough for kindergarten. Is that wise? In this economy? Daddy, for God's sake, she raised her voice. We're not asking for your money. We're just informing you of our plans. Why are you always so critical? I'm not criticizing, Meryl. I'm worried. You have nothing to worry about. We'll figure it out. Of course they didn't. 6 months after buying the house, too big, too expensive, Bryce changed jobs again. The new position wasn't as lucrative as he'd hoped. Meryl called me in tears. They couldn't keep up with the payments. By then, Elizabeth was no longer with us. She left quietly, in her sleep, holding my hand. Her last words were, "Take care of Meryl. She needs you more than she's showing." And I did, the only way I knew how. Wrote checks, paying bills, covered the shortfall in the family budget that kept coming from Bryce's reckless spending. This is the last time, I told myself each time I wired the money. No more handouts, but it was never the last time. There was always a new crisis, a new emergency, a new reason why they needed my financial help. And in return, infrequent visits on holidays, short phone conversations, more like business negotiations, grandchildren who barely know me, a daughter who only sees me as an ATM machine. Since Elizabeth's death, the distance between Meryl and me has only grown. My wife was the link, the shock absorber that cushioned our conflicts. Without her, we were left alone with our old wounds and resentments. You have to be more forgiving, Elizabeth told me in her lifetime. Meryl is just as stubborn as you are. You're too alike to get along easily. Perhaps she was right. I see many of my traits in Meryl: pride, stubbornness, unwillingness to admit mistakes. But unlike me, she never learned to take responsibility for her decisions. The last 3 years after Elizabeth's death passed in a kind of fog. I continued to live by inertia, clinging to familiar rituals: breakfast at 6:30, a walk along the promenade, reading the newspaper, transfers to Meryl's account when she asked for help. No questions, no conditions. I had become an ATM machine for them that never said no. But now, sitting on the terrace with a cup of cold coffee, I suddenly realized clearly, it couldn't go on like this. The wedding anniversary party to which I was not invited was the last straw. I had let my daughter and her husband take advantage of my kindness for too long, taking it for granted. Meryl probably thinks I'll just accept another humiliation, that I'll swallow my resentment like I've always done, that the next time they need money, I'll pull out my checkbook again, oblivious to their neglect. But this time would be different. I rose from the chair, feeling the pain in my back, the constant companion of the last few years, relinquishing itself to a new resolve. I walked to the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out the suit I hadn't worn since Elizabeth's funeral. Dark blue, austere, impeccably tailored, albeit a little old-fashioned, but perfect for what I had in mind. On Saturday, I would show up at their party. Uninvited, I will look my daughter and her husband in the eye. I will remind them of my existence. Saturday came unexpectedly quickly. I woke up earlier than usual at 5 in the morning with a feeling of heaviness in my chest. The day promised to be sunny, but my thoughts were far from the weather. Tonight I was going to do something I'd never done before, go somewhere I wasn't expected or wanted to be. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I was fully prepared. The dark blue suit fit me worse than it had 3 years ago. I'd lost weight since Elizabeth's death. The shirt seemed too loose at the neck, but the tie hid that flaw. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, scrutinizing my reflection. Gray hair, neatly combed, wrinkles around my eyes and mouth, a straight back, a military bearing I'd retained from my days in the army as a young man. "You look like an old fool about to go to his own execution," I said to my reflection and grinned bitterly. At the last minute, I decided to get a present. I rummaged through the pantry and found a bottle of collector's whiskey I'd been saving for a special occasion. I wrapped it in the gift paper I'd been saving since Christmas. Let it not be said that I came empty-handed. The cab arrived at 5 o'clock sharp. The driver, an elderly Hispanic man with a bushy mustache, gave me a friendly nod. "Where are we going, sir?" I gave him the address of Merrill and Bryce's house in the suburb of Henlopen Acres, a neighborhood considered upscale by locals. The houses there are bigger than the average family needs and more expensive than they can afford. But everyone seems to be okay with that. The ride took about 20 minutes. I looked out the window at the streets, stores, and parks floating by and thought about what I was going to do. Part of me wanted to ask the driver to turn around and take me back home, to forget about this whole thing, to go on with my life as before, quietly alone with occasional calls from my daughter when she needed money. But the other part, the stronger part, craved confrontation, wanted to set the record straight. "Here we are, sir." The driver's voice brought me out of my reverie. I paid, leaving a generous tip, and got out of the car. Merrill and Bryce's house glowed with lights. There were at least a dozen cars parked in the driveway and along the street. Music, muffled by the walls, was coming from the backyard where the party appeared to be taking place. I took a deep breath and headed toward the house. The front door was unlocked. Guests were apparently coming in and out freely. I walked into a spacious hallway lined with framed photos. Merrill and Bryce on the beach, children on bicycles, a family portrait against a fall forest backdrop. None of the pictures had me in them. Walking through the house, I stepped out into the backyard. The patio was decorated with garlands of lights, tables covered with white tablecloths and stacked with snacks and drinks. 30 guests stood in groups, talking and laughing. Music was playing something contemporary that I didn't recognize. I noticed Merrill right away. She was standing in the center of the large group, wearing a pale blue dress that artfully concealed a barely visible pregnancy. Next to her was Bryce, impeccably dressed as always, with a glass of wine in his hand. He was talking animatedly, gesturing with his free hand, and the people around him were laughing. For a few moments I just stood at the exit of the house, unnoticed by anyone. I watched the scene, feeling like a ghost at someone else's celebration of life. Then I moved forward with determination, clutching the gift in my hand. The first person to notice me was Ella, my 10-year-old granddaughter. She was sitting at the far table with several children, picking at a plate of dessert. "Grandpa?" Her voice was full of surprise, but not joy. Heads began to turn in my direction. The conversations died down. The music continued to play, but now it seemed inappropriately cheerful against the sudden tension. Merrill froze with her glass in her hand. Her face was as astonished as if she'd seen a ghost. "Daddy?" she finally squeezed out. "What are you doing here?" I came closer, with a smile that didn't come easily. "I came to wish you a happy anniversary," I said, holding out a gift. 15 years is a significant date. Bryce was the first to come to his senses. He stepped forward with a look of fake joy on his face. "Garland, what a surprise. We didn't expect to see you." "Obviously," I said, not hiding the irony. Merrill gave her husband a warning look, then turned to me. "Dad, can we talk inside?" "Why?" I put my hand around the crowd. "Isn't that what family gatherings are for? For the whole family to get together?" An awkward silence hung over the patio. The guests looked around, unsure how to react to the scene. "Of course," Merrill finally said, smiling strainedly. "You're right. I'm just surprised." "You shouldn't be. I'm your father. Isn't it natural for me to be here?" She didn't answer, just took the gift from my hands and handed it to the nearest guest without even looking at what was inside. "Are you hungry? Would you like something to drink?" she asked, clearly trying to smooth things over. "A whiskey, if that's okay," I replied. "On the rocks." While Merrill went to get a drink, I stayed standing next to Bryce, feeling the stares of the guests. Some of them were familiar to me, neighbors, a couple of old family friends. Others were complete strangers. "How are things going at work, Bryce?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Still waiting for that big promotion?" He gave me a strained smile. "Everything's going according to plan. The company is restructuring, but my position is stable." "I'm glad to hear that, especially given the new circumstances." I nodded toward Merrill, who was returning with a glass of whiskey. "A third child is an added expense." Bryce paled slightly. "We can handle it," he said with pressure. "We've got it under control." Merrill handed me the glass, avoiding eye contact. "Here's your whiskey, Daddy." "Thank you, darling." I took a sip and grumbled. Cheap scotch diluted with too much ice. But I didn't comment. Gradually, the party returned to its normal rhythm. The guests, satisfied that no drama was imminent, went back to their conversations. The music was still playing. Merrill and Bryce excused themselves to greet the newly arrived guests, leaving me alone. I moved to the edge of the patio where it was quieter and began to observe the scene. Caden, my 14-year-old grandson, was standing in a circle of teenagers, talking excitedly. I decided to move closer, to listen. "The old geezer lives alone in this big house," Caden said to me. "He's got more money than he can spend. Do you know what he got me last Christmas? Socks. Regular black socks and a book about dinosaurs. It was like I was 10 years old." The teenagers giggled. I froze in place, feeling the blood rush to my face. "What did your parents do?" one of the boys asked. "Nothing. My mom says you should be grateful, that he's old and doesn't understand what's trendy now. But I know he's just a cheapskate. Grandpa could buy me a new console or an iPhone without bothering me. But no, he thinks it would spoil me." I quietly backed away, not wanting to be seen. My grandson's words hurt more than I expected. Not the fact that he was disappointed with the gift that was understandable. It was the contempt with which he spoke of me. Old geezer. A cheapskate. Where did a 14-year-old boy get such bile? The answer came to me when I noticed Bryce standing nearby. He'd heard the conversation too, but he did nothing to stop his son. On the contrary, a slight grin played across his face. I walked over to the bar to refresh my drink. The bartender, a young man in a white shirt and black vest, smiled politely at me. "What'll it be, sir?" "A double whiskey," I replied. "No ice." He poured me a generous portion from the bottle I'd brought. At least now I'd be drinking decent alcohol. Standing at the bar, I watched Merrill and Bryce accept congratulations from the guests. They looked happy, successful, the perfect middle-class couple. No one there knew that their idol was kept alive by the checks I wrote every month. That without my support, this whole facade of prosperity would crumble in a matter of weeks. When the clock struck 7:30, Bryce tapped his fork on his glass, calling for silence. The guests fell silent, turning to look at their host. "Friends," he began with a wide smile, "Merrill and I want to thank you for sharing this special day with us. 15 years is a major milestone. There have been ups and downs, but we've gotten through it all together." The guests murmured approvingly. Someone shouted, "Here's to the next 15. "And we have one more reason to be happy," Bryce continued, putting his arm around Merrill's shoulders. "Our family will be bigger this fall. We're expecting a new addition." Applause, congratulations, cheers. Merrill glowed as she accepted hugs from her friends. Bryce was shaking hands, clapping his friends on the shoulders, accepting congratulations with the look of someone who had accomplished something remarkable. I stood off to the side, holding a glass of whiskey, feeling completely superfluous at this celebration of life. No one came up to me to share my joy. No one even looked in my direction. I was invisible, an uninvited guest, tolerated out of politeness, but eager to leave. When the first wave of congratulations subsided, I decided it was time to act. I placed my glass on the nearest table and walked toward Merrill, who was surrounded by her friends. "Congratulations," I said, interrupting their animated conversation. "It's wonderful news." Merrill turned around, her smile fading slightly. Thank you, Dad. I don't think your house is ready for another baby, I continued. The nursery needs to be renovated. And as I recall, your bedroom has some wiring problems too. One of Meryl's friends, a full woman in a bright red dress, giggled, clearly embarrassed. Daddy, can we discuss this later? Meryl said quietly, casting an expressive glance at her friends. Sure, I agreed. I just wanted to know if you plan to use the last check I wrote to prepare the house for the new baby, or will it be used to cover old debts? There was an awkward pause. Meryl's friends glanced around, not knowing how to react. My daughter turned pale, her eyes narrowed with anger. Excuse us, she said to her friends, grabbed my elbow and dragged me toward the house. What are you doing? She hissed when we were in the relative privacy of the patio entrance. Taking an interest in my daughter's life, I replied calmly. Isn't that what fathers do? You humiliate me in front of my friends, talking about money, about checks. They can't know about this. About what? That I'm helping you with the mortgage, or that without my help, you'd have lost this house a long time ago? Meryl's face contorted with rage. Why did you come here? To ruin our party? I came because I'm your father, and the father of your children. Isn't that reason enough? I didn't invite you, she cut me off. Yes, I noticed. I wonder why. Are you ashamed to introduce me to your friends? Or are you afraid I'll say the wrong thing, that I'll reveal family secrets? By this point, our conversation had attracted attention. Bryce approached us, his face expressing fake concern. Is everything okay? He asked, looking at Meryl. No, it's not, she replied, keeping her eyes on me. My father thought he could show up uninvited and make a scene. I'm not making a scene, I countered. I was just asking how you plan to use the money I gave you. It's none of your business, Meryl exclaimed, raising her voice. You gave us that money. Period. What we do with it is our business. By now, the music had died down. All the guests were looking in our direction, not hiding their curiosity. My grandchildren stood in the distance, Caden with a gloating expression on his face, Ella, frightened and confused. Meryl, let's not, Bryce said quietly, trying to take control of the situation. Your father certainly didn't choose the best moment, but— No, Meryl interrupted him. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of his constant lecturing, his constant control. He thinks that if he gives us money, he has the right to interfere in our lives. I looked at my daughter, red with anger, with trembling lips, and suddenly I saw in her the little girl who had once screamed in my face, I don't want a computer. I want you to come to my concert. Meryl, I began, trying to speak calmly. I don't control you. I'm worried about you, about your children, about your future. No, she was almost screaming now. You're not worried. You just can't accept that I'm living my own life, that I make my own decisions, that I don't need your approval. If you don't need my approval, why do you need my money? I asked quietly but clearly. There was dead silence. Meryl's face turned white as chalk. Get out, she said in a low voice. What? Get out? Now she was shouting at the top of her voice. I didn't invite you to the party. I don't want to see you at all. Get out. Bryce put his hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. No, Bryce. I won't take it anymore. He comes here, humiliates me in front of my friends, ruins our party. Let him go. I stood there stunned by her words, feeling the stares of dozens of people. Some looked sympathetically, others with ill-concealed pleasure at the drama unfolding. Bryce stepped toward me, a condescending smile playing across his face, the smile of a man who had just won an argument he wasn't even in. Garland, would it really be better if you went home? He said softly, as if addressing a cranky child. Meryl is upset, and your presence only makes things worse. We'll talk later when everyone has calmed down. I looked at him, at his smug face, and felt a wave of cold rage rising inside. Then I looked at Meryl, who was standing with her arms crossed over her chest, still shaking with anger. As you wish, I said quietly. This is your house. and your party." I turned and walked toward the exit, feeling dozens of eyes watching my every move. As I passed the bar, I noticed my bottle of whiskey, open, but almost full. I stopped, took it, and continued on my way. No one tried to stop me. No one said a word. I walked through the house, through the hallway with pictures that didn't include me, to the front door. Stepping outside, I took a deep breath of the evening air. Dusk had already descended on the city. The first stars had lit up. I stood for a few minutes, gathering my thoughts, then pulled out my phone and called a cab. As I waited, sitting on a bench by the road, Meryl's words kept running through my mind. "I didn't invite you to the party." Such a small thing, such a trivial thing, but it hit something deep inside me. All my life I tried to be a good father, provided for my family, gave my children everything I could. And this was the result. I was kicked out the door as an unwanted guest. The cab arrived 10 minutes later. I sat in the back seat, gave my address, and leaned back, feeling endlessly tired. "Rough night?" the driver asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. "Yes," I answered briefly, not wanting to go into details. When we pulled up to my house, I paid and got out of the car. The house greeted me with silence and darkness. I turned on the light in the hallway, went into the study, and sat down at the desk. I opened a drawer, pulled out my checkbook, and placed it in front of me. The last check I'd written to Meryl was dated last week, $8,000 to cover late mortgage payments. It hadn't been cashed yet. I checked the account this morning. I opened my laptop, logged into my bank account, and found the Stop Payment section. A few clicks, a confirmation of identity, and the payment was canceled. The check became void. Then I opened a new email and wrote a brief message to Meryl and Bryce's bank, explaining that I would no longer cover their mortgage payments, that all previous arrangements were canceled. After sending the letter, I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel bitter or resentful, but strangely calm. It was as if I'd dropped a heavy weight I'd been carrying for too long. I opened the bottle of whiskey, poured it into my glass, and took a sip. The alcohol burned my throat, but it brought clarity of thought. I had made my decision, and there was no turning back. If Meryl and Bryce wanted to live without my interference, they would have to live without my money. The phone in my pocket vibrated. I pulled it out and saw Meryl's name on the screen, the first call of many that would follow in the coming days. I hit the reject button and turned the phone off. Sunday morning was surprisingly quiet. I woke up in a chair in my office with a stiff neck and the taste of whiskey in my mouth. The bottle on the desk was half empty. The clock read 8 a.m. I'd slept in longer than usual, but still early by Sunday standards. The first thing I did was check the phone I'd turned off last night. Turning it on, I saw 12 missed calls from Meryl, 8 from Bryce, and 3 messages on my voicemail. I didn't bother listening to them. Instead, I muted the sound and put the phone screen down. The coffee helped clear my head, though the slight headache still throbbed in my temples. I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at my garden in the morning sunshine, and thought about last night. Meryl's words were still ringing in my ears. "I didn't invite you to the party." Such a simple phrase, but how much contempt, rejection, and desire to cut me out of her life was in it. After breakfast, I decided to check my bank account. As expected, the check had not yet been cashed, and now it couldn't be cashed. My letter to the bank was marked as read. The deed was done. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting visitors and for a moment thought it might be Meryl. But through the peephole I saw Maverick Hancock, my longtime friend and the only person I still trusted. Maverick was a tall, dark-skinned man with a neatly trimmed gray beard and sharp eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. We'd met in college, back in 1968, and had kept in touch ever since, despite our different career paths. He became a literature professor. I became a financial analyst. He wrote books. I wrote analytical reports. But what united us more than shared memories of our college years was a mutual respect and the ability to speak plainly to each other. "You look lousy," he said instead of greeting me when I opened the door. "I feel the same way," I replied, letting him in. "Coffee? Tea would be better, if you have any. And aspirin for you, from the look of you." We settled into the kitchen. Mavrin sat at the table while I made tea and coffee. He didn't rush me into conversation, knowing I'd start on my own when I was ready. It was one of the things I appreciated about him, his ability not to push, to give the other person space. "Were you at the party?" I finally asked, putting a cup of tea in front of him. "No, I wasn't invited," he answered. "But Eleanor was. She called me last night, told me what had happened. Eleanor was his wife and Elizabeth's longtime friend. She and Mavrin had been married for 45 years, had raised 3 children, and now enjoyed the company of 7 grandchildren." "What did she say?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "That you showed up uninvited, that there had been a scene between you and Merrill, that you were asked to leave." I nodded, staring into my cup of coffee. That's what had happened. Except Eleanor probably didn't mention why I wasn't invited? Why did my only daughter decide not to invite her father to celebrate her 15th wedding anniversary? Mavrin sighed. "Garland, we both know that your relationship with Merrill has always been complicated, ever since she was a teenager." "Yes, but it's not teenage rebellion anymore. She's 43, she's got 2 kids, she's about to have a third, and she acts like I'm a stranger to her." "Maybe she is," Mavrin said softly. "Not in the sense of kinship, of course, but emotionally. You've been living in different worlds with her for a long time. Your connection—" "Our bond is money," I interrupted him. "She only needs me as an ATM. When they have mortgage problems, I'm suddenly her favorite daddy. And when they need to celebrate family events, I'm redundant." Mavrin didn't argue. He knew I was right. Instead, he asked, "What are you going to do now?" I told him about yesterday's decision, to cancel the check, to end the financial support. He listened attentively without interrupting. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, pondering what he had heard. "Are you sure it wasn't an impulsive decision?" he finally asked. "Not a reaction to last night's humiliation?" "Maybe it was," I admitted. "But even if it was an impulse, it was long overdue. How many years had I been their cash cow? How many times had Bryce promised that the next promotion would solve their financial problems? How many times did Merrill swear they'd get their expenses under control? And each time it ended the same way, with a new call for help." Mavrin nodded, agreeing with what I said. "I'm not saying you're wrong, Garland. I just want to make sure you're not acting out of resentment." "There is a grudge," I admitted. "It would be strange if there weren't. But it's more than that. It's, how shall I put it, an act of self-respect. I no longer want to be an ATM for people who don't even consider inviting me to a family reunion." Mavrin sipped his tea and looked at me with a slight smile. "You know, there was a character in my first book, an old sailor who spent his life sending money to his family but never came home himself. He thought it was his duty to provide for them, even if it meant his absence. And when he finally returned, old and sick, it turned out that his children had been raised by strangers who valued his money, but not himself." "And how did the story end?" I asked, though I already guessed the answer. "He died alone," Mavrin replied. "His children came to the funeral, but they grieved not for him but for the stopped remittances." "That's a comforting story." I couldn't hold back a bitter chuckle. "I didn't tell it to comfort you. I told it to make you realize that what's going on between you and Merrill isn't unique. It's an old story about money, love, and misunderstanding. The only question is whether you want a different ending." We were silent for a moment, finishing our drinks. In the silence of the kitchen, we could hear only the ticking of the clock and the birds singing in the garden. "The phone hasn't stopped ringing," I said at last. 12 calls from Merrill just last night, 8 from Bryce. They must have found out about the check by now. And you're not going to answer it. No, not yet anyway. I need, silence. Time to think. No yelling, no accusations, no demands. Mazarin nodded understandingly. That's reasonable. But they won't stop trying to contact you, especially if it's a large sum of money. 8,000, I said. To them, that's the difference between keeping the house and eviction. Then be prepared for a siege. They'll call, they'll write, they might even come here. I know, but I'm not going to give up. This time, I'm determined to see it through. Mazarin and I spent several hours together, discussing not only my situation with Merrill, but other topics, books, politics, old friends. It was one of those leisurely Sunday conversations that become more valuable as we age. When the world around you is speeding up and you yourself are slowing down, these conversations are islands of stability to hold on to. After Mazarin left, I checked my phone. 5 more missed calls from Merrill and 2 from Bryce. New voicemails, which again I didn't bother to listen to. I turned my phone off altogether, deciding to give myself a full day of silence. I spent the evening reading an old Hemingway novel I'd reread several times already, the story of a fisherman, his great fish, and a defeat that turned out to be greater than any victory. I had always found something in this book that resonated with my thoughts, especially now that I found myself struggling with my own demons. Before going to bed, I prayed for the first time in a long time, not because I was particularly religious, but because I felt the need to reach out to something bigger than myself. I asked not for reconciliation with my daughter, not for resolution of conflict, but for strength to endure what was to follow. Monday began with an insistent knock on the door. I was just finishing breakfast when I heard a sharp pounding. When I opened the door, I saw Bryce, disheveled, eyes red from sleep, wearing a crumpled shirt. "Garland, we need to talk," he said without greeting. "Good morning, Bryce," I said calmly. "Come on in." He walked into the house, looking around nervously as if he expected to see something unusual. "What's going on?" he asked once we were in the living room. "Why aren't you answering your cell phone? And what happened to the check?" "Sit down," I suggested, pointing to a chair. "Coffee?" "To hell with coffee," he exclaimed. "Garland, the bank sent a notice of default. Our check, your check. It bounced. They're saying the payment was canceled." "Yes, that's right," I confirmed, sitting down across from him. "I stopped the payment." Bryce stared at me as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "But why? We were counting on that money. We'd already scheduled the mortgage payment." "I know, but after Saturday night I decided it was time to stop that practice." "Because of the party?" he asked incredulously. "You're depriving us of our home because of some stupid spat?" "It's not a stupid spat, Bryce. It's an indication of how you and Merrill feel about me. I'm just an ATM machine to you, that's all. When you need money, you call. When you need to celebrate a family event, I'm the one you don't need." Bryce changed tactics. His face took on a conciliatory expression. "Look, Garland, I understand that you're upset. Merrill shouldn't have reacted that way. She was stressed out about the pregnancy, hormones and all. You know how women are." I stared at him in silence, not giving in to this cheap manipulation. "We can fix this," he continued. "We can have a family dinner next week. Just you, Merrill, the kids and me. We'll talk, clear up any misunderstandings." "It's not a misunderstanding, Bryce. This is a conscious decision. I will no longer finance your lives. You're adults. You're on your own." His face twitched. His mask of friendliness began to slip. "You can't do this to us. We could lose the house." "You bought the house beyond your means," I said calmly. "I warned you about that 5 years ago, but you didn't listen. Now you have to deal with the consequences of your decisions. What about the children?" There was a note of desperation in his voice. "Do you want your grandchildren on the streets?" "Don't be so dramatic, Bryce. You have options. Sell the house, buy something smaller and cheaper, or get a second job, or have Meryl find something with a full-time job. There are solutions, they just take effort and responsibility. He looked at me with undisguised hatred. You're a heartless old man, he said through gritted teeth. Elizabeth would roll over in her grave if she knew what you were doing to her daughter. It was a low blow, but I didn't let myself get emotional. Don't you dare talk about my wife, I said quietly. You have no right to use her name in your manipulations. Bryce stood up, realizing he'd lost this battle. This isn't over, Garland. Meryl is going to be furious. I'm aware of that. Judging by the number of calls, she's already furious. You're going to regret this, he threw, heading for the exit. We'll find a way to make you pay. Threats, Bryce? Really? I shook my head. It only confirmed that I'd made the right decision. After he left, I sat in silence for a long time, thinking about what had happened. Bryce had shown his true colors, a greedy, manipulative man willing to do anything for money. I'd always known he was like that, but I'd never seen it so clearly before. That evening, Maverine called. Eleanor heard the news from her friend Meryl, he said without preamble. The whole town is buzzing. Bryce is telling everyone that you're out of your old age and taking revenge on your daughter over some little thing. Predictable, I said tiredly. He was here this morning. First he tried to pity me, then he threatened me. Classic Bryce. Meryl's hysterical, according to Susan. Says they're going to lose the house. They won't lose the house if they start acting rationally. Sell it. Buy something affordable. Start living in the real world instead of on credit. You know they won't do that, Maveron said softly. At least not right away. First they'll panic, then they'll look for other sources of money. Then they'll blame everyone around them, and only at the very end, perhaps, will they recognize reality. I sighed, realizing my friend was right. Meryl had never been good at admitting her mistakes or taking responsibility. That was something I hadn't taught her, too busy making money and writing checks. You know, Maverine continued, there's an irony in this whole situation. You've worked your whole life to provide for your family. You sacrificed time with your daughter for the money you could give her, and in the end, that very money became a wall between you. His words hit the mark. That's what I've been thinking about these past few days. How my attempts to be a good father through financial support ended up destroying the very possibility of a real relationship. What should I have done differently, Maverine? I asked. Quit my career? Sit at home playing dolls with her? That's not the point, he answered. It's not the quantity of time, it's the quality of time. It's about what you've taught her by example. You showed her that love is expressed through money, through material goods, that problems are solved with a checkbook. No wonder she now sees you only as a source of funding. I remained silent, realizing the bitter truth in his words. All these years I had taught Meryl the wrong things without realizing it. I thought I was keeping her safe, but I was actually robbing her of her autonomy. I thought I was making up for my absence with gifts, but I was actually reinforcing her belief that love was measured in money. It's too late to change, I finally said. She's 43. Her character is molded. Our relationship is what it is. It's never too late, Maverin argued. But change won't happen overnight, and it will be painful for both of us. The question is whether you're willing to go through that pain for the possibility of a better relationship in the future. After my conversation with Maverin, I sat on the terrace for a long time, looking up at the stars and reflecting on my life, about the decisions that have brought me to this point, about the daughter who only sees me as an ATM machine, about grandchildren who call me an old geezer, about the son-in-law who barely conceals his contempt for me, about money, which I thought was the solution to all problems, but which has become the source of new ones. I thought of Elizabeth, of what she would say now. She had always been wiser than me about relationships. She saw what I was missing, sensed what I was ignoring. Maybe if she were alive, things would have turned out differently. But she isn't, and I have to find my way in this darkness. A path that started with refusing to be an ATM and now leads to where? To a complete break with my daughter? To a new understanding of each other? To a silence that would remain forever? I didn't know the answer. I only knew that I couldn't go on as before. Something had to change, either our relationship or the lack of it. There was no third. The phone I'd turned on after Bryce left rang again. Meryl. I stared at the screen where her name glowed and wondered whether to answer. What would I say to her? What would she say to me? Would it be recriminations, threats, pleas? Or maybe for the first time in a long time, a sincere conversation between two adults? I didn't answer. It wasn't time yet. I needed this silence, space for thinking, for making decisions, for preparing for what was to follow. Silence as a respite before a new phase of struggle. Silence as medicine for old wounds. I turned off my phone and went to bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring a new day and new challenges. But on this night, I needed peace. A silence that would help me gather my strength and my thoughts. Silence where I could hear my own heart and realize what it really wanted. The week of silence stretched into 2 weeks. I continued to not return Meryl and Bryce's calls, though their persistence didn't diminish. On the contrary, each day they became more inventive in their attempts to contact me. Bryce came to the house twice, but I would not open the door. Meryl sent several emails, first angry, then pleading. In the last one, she wrote that the bank had started foreclosure proceedings and if I didn't help, they would lose the house within a month. I read all the letters but didn't respond to a single one. On Thursday, I made a final decision. It was time to cut this Gordian knot once and for all. I contacted my attorney, Paul Jennings, and set up an appointment for the next day. Paul's office was in the center of Henlopen Acres, in an old brick building that remembered colonial times. Paul himself was about 20 years younger than I was, but was already starting to turn gray at the temples. We'd been working together since I'd retired and decided to get my finances in order. Garland, he rose from his desk, shaking my hand. It's good to see you. You look determined. I am, I said, sitting down in the chair across from him. I need to make some serious changes to my will and trust. Paul looked at me carefully. Is something wrong? It's a long story, but the gist of it is that I want to change the terms of inheritance of my estate, and to do it as soon as possible. He nodded without asking questions. That's what I appreciated about him. Professionalism without being too curious. What exactly do you want to change? First, eliminate Meryl as the primary heir. Instead, create an education fund for my grandchildren, Caden and Ella. The money should only be available to pay for their college tuition, not before. Meryl and Bryce should not have access to these funds under any circumstances. Paul wrote down my instructions, occasionally looking up to make sure he understood correctly. Second, I want my house and the rest of my property to be sold upon my death, with the proceeds divided as follows: 25% to the same educational fund, 25% to the local hospital where Elizabeth worked, 25% to the library at the college I attended, and 25% to the Veterans Aid Fund. And Meryl? Paul asked, raising an eyebrow. You're not leaving her anything? Nothing directly, I confirmed. If she wants to go back to school or get a new profession, the education fund can pay for it, but no direct cash payments. Paul was silent for a moment, considering my words. Garland, I don't mean to pry, but this is a big decision. Are you sure you want your daughter completely out of the will? It could be challenged in court. I'm not excluding her completely, I objected. I'm setting up a fund for her children, and I'm willing to include a clause explaining my decision if it will avoid litigation. Paul nodded. Good. I'll prepare all the paperwork, but it will take a few days. Make it a priority, Paul. I'll pay well for the urgency. After meeting with the lawyer, I went to the office of the cell phone carrier. There I canceled my old contract and signed up for a new one with a new phone number. The operator, a young girl with bright hair, looked at me strangely when I insisted that my old number not forward calls to the new one, but complied without further question. "Your new number has been activated, Mr. Winship," she said as she handed me the paperwork. "Anything else?" "No, thank you. That's all." As I walked out of the office, I felt strangely relieved. It was as if I'd severed the invisible thread that bound me to the past. Now Meryl and Bryce wouldn't be able to reach me the way they used to. Sure, they could come to the house, but after a few unsuccessful attempts, I was sure they'd abandon the idea. That evening, I called Mavram from the new number to inform him of my decision. He listened to me without comment, only asking at the end, "Are you sure this is what you want, Garland? A complete breakup?" "I don't see any other way," I answered. We'd been living in different worlds for a long time. The only thing we had in common was money. That's gone now, and frankly, I'm relieved. "What about your grandchildren?" he asked. "Are you prepared to lose them too?" It was a painful question. I thought about Caden and Ella for a long time, about how my decision would affect them. But deep down, I knew I'd already lost them. Caden only saw me as an old geezer, and Ella was adopting more and more of her parents' attitudes. "I'm setting up an educational foundation for them," I said. "When they get older, they'll realize that I cared about their future, even if I wasn't part of their present." Maverick sighed. "I hope you're right, my friend, and I hope you don't regret this decision." "The only thing I regret," I replied, "is that I didn't do it sooner. How many years had I spent trying to buy my daughter's love? And what did I get in return? Contempt and use." The next day, I set about updating my home. For too long, I had lived among things that reminded me of the past. Photos of Meryl at different ages, childhood drawings stored in desk drawers, souvenirs from family trips. I didn't throw them away. I couldn't bring myself to completely destroy these traces of the past. Instead, I boxed them all up and took them to the attic. Let them be stored there, in darkness and dust, like the memories themselves. Saturday morning, as I was eating breakfast on the terrace, Louise Hampton, the widow of the dentist who had unwittingly informed me of Meryl's pregnancy, appeared unexpectedly. "Garland!" she exclaimed, coming in through the unlocked garden gate. "I've been calling you all week, but there's no answer." "I've changed the phone, Louise," I said, rising to meet her. "Do you want to sit down? Coffee?" "I'd love to." She sank into the wicker chair, looking at me with undisguised curiosity. "The whole town is talking about you and Meryl. Such a scandal. Is it true you disinherited her?" I smiled. News in small towns spread faster than wildfire, often with fantastic details. "Not exactly," I replied, pouring her coffee. "I've set up an educational foundation for my grandchildren, and yes, I've changed some things in my will. But that's my own business, Louise." She nodded, accepting the cup. Of course. I was just worried about you. After that night at the party, it's all so unpleasant. Meryl shouldn't have treated you like that." "It's in the past," I said, not wanting to go into details. "How are your grandchildren? Are they still here?" Louise took the hint and moved on to neutral topics. We talked about the weather, about the new supermarket that had opened on the outskirts of town, about the upcoming festival in the park. Then she mentioned it in passing. "You know, Catherine Lowell is back in town. You remember her? You were in high school together, I think." I remembered Catherine, the tall blonde with the infectious laugh that all the boys in our class had a crush on. She left Henlopen Acres after high school, married a military man, and traveled all over the world with him. Elizabeth and I would occasionally get postcards from her from exotic places. "She was widowed 3 years ago," Louise continued. "She was living with her daughter in Seattle, but decided to move back to her hometown. Bought a cottage on Maple Street, That cute little cottage with the blue shutters. I nodded, not quite sure what she was getting at. She was asking about you, Louise said with a sly smile. Wondering how you were doing after Elizabeth. Really? I couldn't hide my surprise. What did you tell her? That you're doing great, that you're doing well, that you're still the same handsome and interesting man you were when you were younger. I laughed. Flattery suits you, Louise. It's not flattery, it's the truth, she retorted. Anyway, Catherine's having a little party next Saturday, a housewarming party, and she asked me to invite you. I wondered. The thought of a social event didn't inspire much enthusiasm. On the other hand, I really needed to start a new chapter in my life, and maybe meeting people from the past, unrelated to the recent troubles, would be a good start. Tell them I'll be there, I said finally, and thank you for inviting me. After Louise left, I sat for a long time thinking about our conversation, Catherine Lowell. I wondered what she was like after all these years. Did she still have that infectious laugh, that sparkle in her eyes that once drove half the school crazy? And why was she asking about me? The following Thursday, I received an envelope from Paul Jennings. Inside were documents arranged according to my instructions, a new will, papers establishing an educational foundation, an explanatory letter explaining the reasons for my decision. I read everything carefully, signed it, and sent it back with the courier. The deed was done. In the evening of the same day, Mavrin called. "Did you hear the news?" he asked without preamble. "What news?" "Merrill and Bryce have put the house up for sale." Eleanor had seen the ad this morning. I paused, digesting the information. So they'd decided to be smart after all, to sell a house they couldn't afford and start living within their means. "It's a good decision," I said finally. "It's smart." "They're moving to Philadelphia," Mavrin continued. "Bryce got a job there. Less pay, but the cost of living is lower than here." "Makes sense, too," I nodded, even though Mavrin couldn't see me. "I hope things work out for them." "Don't you want to contact them?" he asked cautiously. "Maybe now, when they've made a difficult decision, would be a good time to reconcile." I wondered. Part of me wanted to do that, to reach out, to offer, if not financial help, at least moral support. But the other part, the stronger part, knew that would be a mistake. We were past the point of no return. Any attempt to repair the relationship now would be seen as weakness, as a sign that I was ready to go back to being an ATM. "No," I said firmly. "They had made their decision without my help. Let them go their own way. I'll go my way." "Are you sure?" "Positive." Saturday, I put on my best suit and went to Catherine Lowell's party. Her house was exactly as Louise had described it, a cozy cottage with blue shutters drenched in flowers. As I walked to the door with a bottle of wine in my hand, my heart suddenly quickened. I felt like a teenager on a first date, not a 76-year-old widower. Catherine opened the door, still slender, with short silver hair, but with the same sparkle in her eyes that I remembered from high school. "Garland Winship," she exclaimed, smiling broadly. "How many years? How many winters?" "Catherine," I smiled back, handing her the wine. "You look beautiful." "Flatterer," she clapped me playfully on the shoulder. "Come in. Don't just stand on the doorstep. Most of the guests are already here." The party was a pleasant surprise. Instead of a rowdy crowd, it was a dozen people our age, most of whom I'd known since high school. Calm music, delicious food, unhurried conversations about the past and present. No drama, no ulterior motives, just people enjoying each other's company. Catherine was a charming hostess, attentive to all the guests, but paying a little more attention to me than the others. We talked about her travels with her military husband, my career in finance, books we'd read lately, movies we'd seen. We didn't touch on painful topics, not her widowhood or my separation from my daughter. By the end of the evening, when most of the guests had gone, we were alone on the terrace sipping wine and gazing at the stars. "You know," she said suddenly. "I always thought you and I could have been together, in high school, if I hadn't been so stupid and gotten involved with Jack Thornton and his motorcycle." I looked at her in surprise. "Really? And I thought you didn't even notice me. I was such a shy, awkward teenager. You were smart and kind and looked at me like I was the most amazing creature on earth," she smiled. "Girls notice things like that, even if they don't show it." We were silent for a moment, each of us absorbed in our own thoughts. "Do you think," she finally asked, "do you think we still have a chance at our age?" "A chance at what?" I pretended not to understand, though my heart was racing again. "To get to know each other again. No rush, no expectations. Just two people who have a lifetime under their belt, but plenty of time ahead for new beginnings." I looked at her, a beautiful woman with intelligent eyes who saw me not as an ATM, not as a source of funding, but as a person. A person with his own thoughts, feelings, history. "I guess there's always a chance," I replied, covering her hand with mine. "And I'd love to get to know you again, Catherine." Over the next few weeks, I saw Catherine often. We went to the movies, to the local theater, to concerts in the park. We walked along the waterfront, ate lunch in small restaurants, spent evenings talking about books and music. It was not the raucous passion of youth, but a calm, deep sense of mutual interest and respect. Both of us had lived long lives. Both of us had lost beloved spouses. Both of us knew the price of loneliness and the value of human intimacy. In early July, 3 months after my separation from Meryl, I caught a glimpse of news about her. Mavrin, with whom we continued to communicate regularly, reported that she and Bryce and the kids had moved to Philadelphia. The house in Henlopen Acres had been sold for an amount that barely covered their mortgage. They rented an apartment in the suburbs. Bryce got a new job, and Meryl found a position teaching art at a private school. "They're doing fine," Mavrin said. "Not without difficulties, but they're getting by." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of emotions, relief that they'd found a way out of the financial crisis, a slight regret that our paths had diverged so completely, and a quiet confidence that I'd made the right decision. "I'm happy for them," I said sincerely. "I hope these trials will make them stronger." "Do you want me to give them something?" Mavrin asked. "I'll be in Philadelphia next week. I could meet them." I wondered. Was there anything I wanted to say to my daughter after everything that had happened? Some words that might heal a little of the wounds caused by years of misunderstanding and mutual resentment? "No," I finally answered. "Nothing. Our paths have parted. So be it." At the end of the summer, Catherine and I decided to take a little trip, 2 weeks on the coast of Maine, in a small coastal town where time seemed to stop. We walked along the shore, collected seashells, read books in cozy cafes when the weather didn't lend itself to walking. In the evenings, we sat by the fireplace in our rented cottage, talking about the past, the present, and, for the first time in a long time, the future. "You never talk about your daughter," Catherine remarked one evening as we sat on the veranda watching the sunset over the ocean. "I know you have a complicated relationship with her, but I don't know the details." I sighed. It was still a painful subject, but with Catherine I could talk openly. "It's a long story about money, misunderstandings, and not listening to each other," I said. "I spent my life trying to be a good father, providing for her financially, and she spent her whole life wanting something else from me that I didn't know how to give. Eventually, our relationship was reduced to financial transactions. When I stopped being an ATM, it became clear that there was nothing else between us." Catherine listened attentively, without interrupting. "Are you sorry?" she asked me when I had finished. "About the breakup?" I hesitated, looking at the horizon where the sun was slowly sinking into the ocean. "No," I finally answered. "I regret a lot of things. Not being there for her when she was growing up, not teaching her to appreciate the right things, letting money come between us. But not the breakup itself. It was inevitable, and, in a way, liberating, for both of us." Catherine squeezed my hand, and there was more understanding in that gesture than any words could express. "Do you know what I've realized in these months?" I continued. "That self-respect is more important than the illusion of family ties, that it's better to be alone than to be used, and that it's never too late to start a new chapter in life." When we returned to Henlopen Acres, I felt like a different person, more calm, more confident, more whole. The house that had once seemed too big and empty was now just a place where I lived, not a museum of the past, not a crypt of memories, but just home. In the fall, Catherine offered to move in with me. Her cottage with its blue shutters was charming, but cramped for two. We decided it would be a trial period, to see how we lived together before making more serious decisions. The day she moved in, I happened to find an old photograph tucked behind a bookshelf. It showed Meryl and me, she a 6-year-old in a frilly dress, me a young father with a proud smile. We were standing on the beach, holding hands, looking into a camera that Elizabeth was probably holding. I stared at that picture for a long time, at the happy faces of people who didn't yet know what lay ahead of them. Then I carefully placed the photograph in a desk drawer, not in plain sight, but not in a box in the attic either, somewhere between a past that couldn't be changed and a present in which to move on. When Catherine entered the room with the box of books, I smiled at her, sincerely, openly, without a shadow of regret or bitterness. "Welcome home," I said, helping her with the box.